My mother is out of her mind. She took my $10,000 that I was saving for HousEAn, Tunishment, and asked me for $5,000 for my stepsister's education. So, here I am, a month away from college, and I'm broke. And not just a little broke. We're talking every single cent of the $10,000 I'd saved, gone, just like that. I guess I should start with the backstory here. Growing up, it was always just me and my mom, Nicole. My dad wasn't in the picture. He passed away when I was really young, so I have no memories of him, just some old photos and the occasional story from family. Mom did everything she could to make sure I had a good life, but things were tight. She always told me we had to be careful with money, always said that I should save every bit I earned. So, I did. I worked odd jobs from the time I was 12, mowing lawns, babysitting, working in the local grocery store once I was old enough. I saved every bit of that money, and by the time I hit 18, I'd managed to scrape together $10,000. I thought that money was my ticket to college, a buffer so I wouldn't have to stress over every little expense. But then Nicole met Dave, and everything changed. Dave was charming at first, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and light it up, always laughing, always full of stories. He had 2 kids of his own from a previous marriage, Justin, who was 12, and Lily, who was 10. I didn't think much of it when they started spending more time at our place. I mean, my mom was happy, and she deserved that. But the way they all moved in was fast, like unbelievably fast. Once they were in, things started to change. Dave wasn't just Dave anymore. He was suddenly trying to be this father figure to me. He'd make little comments about how I needed to show respect and understand my place in this new family. My room suddenly felt smaller, and so did my life in general. It wasn't even the space or privacy that bugged me the most. It was this sense that I was losing everything I had built with my mom. Every time I'd try to talk to her about it, she'd just shrug it off. "Come on, he's just trying to help," she'd say. Or, "It's an adjustment, but we'll all get used to it." I tried to tell myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just growing pains. Then, one day, I come home to find that my savings account had been emptied. Every single dollar, gone. I could hardly believe it at first. I mean, I'd been checking that account obsessively. I knew exactly how much was in there. I thought maybe there had been some kind of mistake, so I called the bank. But no, the money had been transferred out, and they confirmed it was authorized by the primary account holder, my mom. I was furious, so I stormed into the living room where Nicole and Dave were sitting, watching TV like nothing was wrong. I demanded to know what happened, and that's when my mom hit me with the excuse of a lifetime. She said she took the money as punishment for my attitude towards her new family. She claimed that I hadn't been welcoming enough to Dave, Justin, and Lily, that I was acting entitled and selfish by not making them feel at home. I was speechless. In what world was taking my college savings a reasonable punishment? I had been saving that money for years. It wasn't like I'd been sitting around doing nothing. I'd worked for every dollar of it. I started to argue, but she just looked at me with this blank expression, like I was being unreasonable. Dave, meanwhile, had this smug look on his face, like he was loving every second of it. The argument escalated quickly. I told her this was insane, that she was choosing him over me. She just kept saying that I needed to grow up and accept change. Then, she went on this whole spiel about how they needed the money more than I did. Apparently, Dave had some debts to pay off, debts I hadn't heard a word about until this moment. It was as if all my hard work, all my saving, didn't mean a thing to her. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't know where to go at first, but then I thought of my grandparents. They lived about an hour away, and I knew they'd take me in. When I showed up at their doorstep, they were shocked, but they didn't ask too many questions. They knew Nicole and I had our differences, but I don't think they realized just how bad things had gotten. Living with my grandparents was different. They were kind, supportive, and genuinely concerned about what had happened. When I told them everything, from how fast Dave and his kids had moved in to how my mom had just taken my savings like it was no big deal, they were horrified. My grandfather, especially, couldn't believe it. He kept shaking his head, muttering under his breath about how things had changed. For a while, I kept hoping my mom would call, maybe apologize, or at least try to make things right. But she didn't. Weeks went by, and all I heard was silence. I found out from a cousin that she was telling the family I'd left because I couldn't handle her having a new husband, painting me as some spoiled kid who didn't want to share. It was unbelievable. She was rewriting the entire situation to make herself look like the victim. Meanwhile, I was struggling with what to do next. College was still on my mind, but without that savings, I was back to square one. My grandparents offered to help financially, but I didn't want to burden them. They'd already done so much just by letting me stay with them. The kicker came a month later, when I got a letter from my mom. Not a call, not a text, a letter. In it, she said she hoped I'd learn my lesson about respecting family decisions and that maybe, if I showed a change in attitude, she'd consider letting me come back. She didn't mention the money once. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. It was as if she genuinely believed that taking my savings was a reasonable way to teach me a lesson. I didn't respond to the letter. I felt numb, like I'd lost a part of myself. I realized then that the mom I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who valued her new life more than our relationship. Years went by. I got through college thanks to scholarships, part-time jobs, and my grandparents' support. It wasn't easy, but I made it work. I kept my head down, worked hard, and avoided looking back at what I'd left behind. My relationship with my mom, Nicole, had all but disappeared. We'd hardly spoken since I moved out, and honestly, I was fine with that. Living with my grandparents, I'd found a sense of stability that I hadn't known in years. They were always there, encouraging me through every late-night study session and congratulating me on every little accomplishment. They were my real family, in a way my mom and her new family never were. After graduation, I moved to a small city nearby and started working at a tech company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and I was finally able to stand on my own feet. Life was finally starting to make sense. Then, one day, I get a call from a number I don't recognize. I almost ignored it. Who even answers unknown calls anymore? But something told me to pick up. It was my mom. I hadn't heard her voice in years, and hearing it again after so long felt surreal. She was oddly cheerful, as if the past hadn't happened, like everything was perfectly normal between us. After a bit of small talk, she dropped the real reason for her call. "So, I'm calling because I wanted to talk to you about Emily." Emily? It took me a second to remember that Emily was the daughter she'd had with Dave after I left. She must have been, 17 or 18 now? I'd barely thought about her. She was just some kid who came into my mom's life long after I'd been shut out of it. "Emily just got accepted into college," she announced, her voice thick with pride. "Isn't that wonderful?" I congratulated her, though I felt no connection to the news. Then came the real shocker. She asked me if I could contribute $5,000 to help cover Emily's dorm room expenses. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. $5,000? For Emily's college? I barely knew the girl. I'd never even spoken to her, let alone had a relationship with her. But here was my mom, acting as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world to ask me for thousands of dollars for her other child. When I asked why, she launched into this long-winded explanation about family obligations and supporting each other. She said that as Emily's older brother, it was my responsibility to help her succeed. It was like she'd forgotten everything that had happened between us, as if taking my college savings had never happened, as if we hadn't gone years without a word. She was talking to me like we were one big happy family, like I was some estranged relative who just drifted away and was finally reconnecting. I interrupted her. "Mom, you do remember that you took my college savings, right?" There was silence on the other end for a second, and then she laughed, a light, dismissive laugh. "Oh, come on. That was years ago. Let's not dwell on the past." Her tone was flippant, as if my entire struggle through college had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience, some petty grievance I should have let go of by now. But I couldn't just brush it off like that. To me, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the way she'd chosen her new family over me. When I pushed back, she got defensive. She started saying things like, "I always put a roof over your head," and "I did everything I could for you, and you turned your back on me." She made it sound like I'd been the one who'd left her, who'd been selfish. She twisted every word, trying to make me feel guilty for things I hadn't even done. Then she hit me with, You don't know what it's like, raising 2 kids on a limited income." She went on about how hard it had been for her and Dave after I left, how they'd struggled to make ends meet, and how this was my chance to make up for all the support they'd given me. It was unbelievable. My head was spinning. Every word she said felt like a knife twisting deeper. Here I was, barely scraping by in my own life, and she was calling me out of the blue to ask for thousands of dollars for a half-sister I didn't even know. She didn't apologize, didn't ask how I was doing, didn't acknowledge any of the pain she'd caused. She only cared about what she could get out of me. When I told her I couldn't help, she snapped. Her cheerful tone vanished, replaced by something colder, harder. She called me selfish, accused me of turning my back on family. She said that Emily deserved better, that I was a disappointment for refusing to help my own sister. The guilt-tripping was relentless. She brought up every little thing she'd done for me when I was younger, every sacrifice she claimed to have made. She painted herself as this saint who'd always been there for me, who'd given up everything to raise me alone. I felt my chest tighten with anger. She wasn't taking responsibility for any of it. Not the money she'd taken, not the years of silence, not the fact that she'd cut me out of her life for the sake of her new family. She was rewriting the story, making herself the hero and me the villain. Finally, I told her point blank, "I'm not paying for Emily's college. I don't even know her. And honestly, after everything you've done, you're lucky I'm even on this call right now." She hung up on me without another word. A few days later, I started getting texts from other family members, people I hadn't heard from in ages. Cousins, aunts, even an old family friend reached out, all with the same tone. "Why won't you help your sister? Family is important. Your mom told us everything." Apparently, Nicole had been telling everyone that I was refusing to help my baby sister in her time of need. She'd painted this picture of me as some ungrateful, selfish jerk who didn't care about family. She didn't mention the part where she'd taken my college fund, or that we hadn't spoken in years, just that I was too busy to help out my poor, struggling sister. I wanted to scream. I thought about responding, trying to set the record straight, but I knew it would only make things worse. Nicole had always been good at spinning stories, at playing the victim. No one would believe me over her. To them, she was still the struggling single mom who'd done everything for her son, only to be abandoned when she needed him most. I sat down and wrote her one last message. I told her that I wouldn't be paying for Emily's college, that she needed to stop spreading lies about me, and that if she couldn't respect that boundary, I'd have no choice but to cut off contact completely. I poured everything into that message, every bit of anger, frustration, and hurt I'd carried over the years. I sent it, and then I blocked her number. I blocked every number of the family members who'd been guilt-tripping me. I knew they wouldn't understand, and frankly, I was tired of trying to make them see the truth. I had my own life to live, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into that toxic mess. A part of me felt guilty. There was still this lingering voice in my head, saying that maybe I should have done more, maybe I should have tried harder to mend things. But I couldn't ignore the reality of who she'd become, of what she'd done. Maybe one day, Emily would reach out to me, and maybe then I could tell her my side of the story. But as far as Nicole was concerned, I was done. She'd taken enough from me, my money, my peace of mind, my sense of family. I wasn't going to let her take any more. I'd thought that cutting off contact with my mom would bring me peace. Blocking her number, shutting out the family members who'd taken her side. It was supposed to give me the freedom I'd been craving for years. And for a while it did. I got to live my life on my terms, free of guilt trips and manipulation. But, as with anything involving Nicole, it didn't end there. The first sign of trouble came about 2 months later. I was at work, going through emails, when I got a notification from an unknown number. I ignored it, but a second one came through, then a third. They all said the same thing. "It's about Emily. Please reconsider." As soon as I saw her name, I knew who was behind it. Nicole had apparently moved on from texting me directly to rallying more distant relatives and even old family friends to reach out on her behalf. I had barely gotten past the shock when the notifications started piling up. It wasn't just family. Somehow, Nicole had managed to contact old neighbors, even friends from my high school days. They were all asking me the same thing. "Why won't you help your sister?" Emily deserves a chance. The messages ranged from pleading to downright accusatory, with a few outright calling me selfish or cold-hearted. Among all the names that popped up, one hit harder than the others. Aunt Liza. She was the one family member I'd kept in touch with over the years, someone who'd always been there for me, even during the mess with Nicole. She'd been like a second mom to me, and hearing from her now felt like a punch to the gut. I opened her message, heart pounding. "Hey, I heard about Emily," she wrote. "I know things haven't been easy with your mom, but maybe this is a chance to show her that you're the bigger person. Family's complicated, but we're all we have in the end. Don't let one mistake define everything." One mistake. That's what she called it. Aunt Liza was always one to minimize drama, to see the best in people. But this wasn't just one mistake. This was years of manipulation, of Nicole treating me like a stranger, ignoring me unless she needed something. And now, here was my aunt, someone who should have known better, suggesting that I just let it go and help Nicole out as if it were the simplest thing in the world. I felt a surge of frustration. No one seemed to get it. To them, this was just about a kid needing help with college, as if I was some heartless monster for saying no. No one remembered what Nicole had done to me, how she drained my own college fund and left me to fend for myself. They didn't know about the years of silence, the guilt trips, the way she twisted everything to make me look like the bad guy. That evening, Aunt Liza called. I knew she'd be gentle, but I was still dreading it. When I picked up, she cut straight to the point. "Why can't you just help her out?" she asked. Her voice was soft, pleading. I tried to explain it to her. "Liza, it's not about Emily. It's about Nicole. She only calls me when she wants money, like I'm some kind of ATM. I can't just pretend everything's fine because she suddenly needs something." Liza was quiet for a moment. I could tell she was trying to find a way to defend Nicole, to excuse her behavior. "I know your mom's made mistakes, but holding on to resentment won't help anyone," she said. "People change, and maybe this is her way of reaching out." I nearly laughed. Nicole reaching out? It was the most absurd thing I'd ever heard. If she'd wanted to make amends, she could have apologized years ago. She could have asked how I was doing, shown any interest in my life. But no, she only reached out when she needed something. And now she was using Emily as a bargaining chip, trying to guilt me into handing over thousands of dollars. But I kept my tone calm. "Liza, it's not resentment. It's self-respect. I can't keep bending over backward for someone who never cared about me unless I was useful to her. I'm done being her backup plan." The line went silent. I could tell I'd struck a nerve. Finally, Liza sighed. "I just think you'll regret it if you don't help. Emily's innocent in all this, and she looks up to you. You could be a positive influence for her." Positive influence? I barely knew the girl. She was a stranger, someone I'd only ever heard about in passing. And yet here was my aunt, acting as if I was supposed to feel some kind of obligation to her, as if blood alone was enough to make up for years of neglect and manipulation. I tried to make it clear, "Liza, I'm not saying I hate Emily. I'm saying I can't keep enabling Nicole. I won't pay for her mistakes, not anymore." A week later, I got a message from Nicole herself, an email this time, full of the usual accusations. She called me selfish, heartless, even went as far as to say that I was abandoning Emily the same way I'd abandoned her. She threw in every manipulation tactic in the book, trying to make me feel like I was some kind of monster for standing my ground. But I didn't respond. I knew that anything I said would only fuel her anger, give her more material to twist and use against me. I'd spent years learning how to protect myself from her games, and I wasn't about to fall for them now. Then, the shocker came. A message from Emily herself. It was polite, almost too polite. She introduced herself like we were strangers, which, in a way, we were. She said she'd heard that I was refusing to help, that she understood if I couldn't, but that she wanted to know my side of the story. It felt surreal. Here was this half-sister I barely knew, someone who'd grown up in the shadow of all the chaos Nicole had created, reaching out to me with a level of maturity that even my own mother didn't have. I could tell she was hurt, confused, but she didn't lash out or demand anything. She just wanted to understand. I took a deep breath and decided to tell her the truth. I explained everything, how Nicole had taken my college savings, how she'd cut me off for years, only to reappear whenever she needed money. I told her that my refusal wasn't about her personally, that I didn't have any ill will toward her, but that I couldn't keep letting Nicole use me. I told her I hoped she could understand that it wasn't her fault. After I sent the message, I braced myself for a backlash. I expected anger, maybe even accusations. But when Emily replied, her response shocked me. She thanked me for my honesty. She said she'd always felt like something was off between Nicole and me, that she'd noticed how her mom avoided talking about me. She said she was sorry for the position I was in and that she understood if I needed to distance myself from the family. It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like someone actually understood, like I wasn't alone in this mess. Emily was caught in Nicole's web just as much as I was, but unlike the others, she wasn't blinded by loyalty or guilt. She saw Nicole for who she was, or at least she was beginning to. That didn't stop Nicole, though. She kept up her campaign, spreading rumors and twisting the story to make me look like the villain. Family members who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly chiming in, offering their unsolicited opinions about responsibility and family values. Some even called my job, trying to pressure me through my coworkers. It was like Nicole was on a mission to ruin my life because I wouldn't hand over the money. But through it all, I stayed firm. I'd made my decision, and I wasn't going to let Nicole or anyone else bully me into changing it. Emily kept in touch, mostly just checking in, but she never asked for money or tried to guilt me. I could tell she was struggling with her own feelings about Nicole, and I did my best to be there for her in a way I wished someone had been there for me. The last straw came when Nicole sent me a legal notice, a demand for back pay for all the years she'd raised me, claiming that I owed her for the sacrifices she'd made. It was laughable, really, but it showed just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. I spoke to a lawyer who assured me that her claim had no legal standing. But the sheer audacity of it all, the fact that she was willing to drag me into court over money, made me realize just how little I meant to her. To Nicole, I was nothing more than a bank account, a backup plan she could use whenever she saw fit. So I cut her off completely. I made it clear to every family member, every friend, that I wanted nothing to do with her. Emily and I kept in touch, building a cautious relationship, but Nicole was out of my life for good. In the end, it wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about setting boundaries, about finally standing up for myself after years of manipulation and betrayal. I'd spent too long letting Nicole control my life, and I wasn't going to let her do it anymore. And maybe one day, she'll realize that losing me wasn't worth the price she paid. But by then, it'll be too late. I'll be long gone, living the life I deserve, free from her toxic grasp. You'd think that after the months of silence, the blocked numbers, and my clear refusal to play along with her games, Nicole would get the message. But if I'd learned anything by now, it was that my mom never knew when to quit. She was relentless, always finding new ways to twist the situation, to try and guilt me into giving her what she wanted. It started subtly, or at least as subtle as she could be. I'd get random calls from distant family members, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my dad's sister, even my grandma's best friend, Lorraine. All of them had the same message. Nicole told me you're being really hard on her. Can't you just let it go? The first call came from my cousin, Kelly. I hadn't spoken to her since high school, so seeing her name pop up was a shock. I answered, thinking maybe something had happened, that she was reaching out because she genuinely wanted to reconnect. But as soon as I heard her voice, I knew where this was headed. Hey, long time, no talk, Kelly started, her voice overly bright, like she was trying to mask her real reason for calling. After a few minutes of small talk, she dropped the bomb. So, I heard about the situation with your mom. She told me everything, and honestly, I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn. Stubborn? I could feel my blood pressure rising. Here was someone who hadn't been a part of my life for years, who had no idea what I'd been through, acting like she knew the whole story. I kept my response calm, but firm. I told her that whatever she'd heard was Nicole's version of the story and that it was a lot more complicated than she realized. But Kelly wouldn't drop it. I get it. Okay? I know things haven't always been perfect between you two, but she's still your mom, and you only get one family. Can't you just help her out, for Emily's sake? There it was, the guilt trip. She wasn't even being subtle about it. I tried to explain myself, told her about the years of manipulation, the way Nicole had only reached out when she needed money. But Kelly wasn't having it. She kept saying that family was family, that I needed to be the bigger person. After I hung up, I felt drained. It was like Nicole had found a new way to haunt me, sending these people from my past to do her bidding. And it wasn't just Kelly. The calls kept coming, one after another. Every time I thought I'd made my stance clear, someone else would reach out, spouting the same lines about family, forgiveness, and loyalty. A few weeks later, I got a call from my dad's sister, Aunt Marjorie. Now, Marjorie was a whole different kind of challenge. She'd always been close with Nicole, even though my dad had been out of the picture since I was a kid. Marjorie was the type who took loyalty to family to an extreme, no matter the circumstances. When she called, I could tell right away that this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. She didn't even bother with small talk. "I don't know what's gotten into you," she started, her tone sharp and accusatory. "Your mom did her best raising you, and now you're treating her like she's some stranger. Do you think that's right?" I tried to explain, to tell her that Nicole's version of events was far from the truth, but Marjorie cut me off. "Enough with the excuses. I don't care what happened in the past. She needs help now, and as her son, it's your duty to step up. It's time you acted like a man and took responsibility." Her words stung, but they also made me angry. Here she was, someone who hadn't been a part of my life, telling me what I owed to the woman who had stolen my college savings and abandoned me emotionally. I told Marjorie, firmly but respectfully, that I wasn't going to discuss it any further and that I needed her to respect my decision. But, of course, Nicole wasn't done. When the calls didn't work, she escalated. It was a Saturday morning, and I was just getting ready to head out for the day when there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I looked through the peephole, and my stomach dropped. Nicole was standing there, looking exactly as I remembered. Well-dressed, with that familiar mix of determination and entitlement etched on her face. She wasn't going to leave, that much was clear. With a sigh, I opened the door, already bracing myself for whatever guilt trip she was about to throw at me. "Hi," she said, flashing a smile as if we were on good terms, as if she hadn't spent the past year trying to manipulate me from a distance. "Nicole," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" She shrugged, like her showing up unannounced was perfectly normal. "I thought it was time we talked in person. I know things have been strained, but I think if we just sit down, we can work this out." "Work this out?" I repeated, incredulous. "There's nothing to work out. I told you, I'm not giving you money. I'm done being used." Her smile faltered, and for a second, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. But she quickly masked it, replacing it with a look of exaggerated patience. "Look, I understand you're hurt," she said, in a tone that suggested she thought I was being childish. "But you're blowing this out of proportion. This is about family, about helping each other. Emily looks up to you, you know." The mention of Emily struck a nerve, and she knew it. She was trying to play on whatever guilt or responsibility I might feel toward my half-sister, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me that easily. "I barely know Emily," I said, crossing my arms. "And that's not my fault. You cut me out of your life, remember? You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Nicole's face hardened. The mask of patience slipped, and she stepped closer, her voice low and menacing. "I sacrificed everything for you," she hissed. "You think I enjoyed being a single mother, scraping by to give you a good life? I did all of that, and now you're acting like I owe you something?" It was almost laughable, hearing her twist things like this. "You didn't sacrifice everything for me," I shot back. "You took my savings, ignored me for years, and only showed up when you wanted something. That's not love, Nicole. That's using me." Her face turned red with anger, and she took a deep breath, clearly struggling to keep her composure. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "If that's how you feel, then maybe you're not the person I thought you were. Maybe you've become bitter, selfish, just like your father." That was the final straw. Bringing my dad into it, a man she'd barely let me know, who I'd only heard about through my grandparents, was too much. She was trying to hit me where it hurt, to make me feel like I was betraying some family legacy by refusing to bend to her will. I took a step back, keeping my voice steady. Leave, Nicole. I've made my decision, and you can't guilt me into changing it. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. But, as I'd come to expect, she didn't give up that easily. The next day, I started receiving messages from mutual friends, people I hadn't even thought knew about my situation. They were all saying the same thing. Why are you being so hard on your mom? I heard she went to see you, and you refused to even talk to her. Nicole had spun the story again, making herself look like the victim, painting me as the cold, heartless son who wouldn't give her the time of day. I could see the pattern now, clear as day. She would never accept my refusal. She'd keep pushing, keep lying, keep twisting the truth until she got what she wanted. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I was done playing her game. The calls, the guilt trips, even the unexpected visit, none of it could change my mind. I wasn't her pawn anymore. I wasn't the scared kid who'd let her walk all over him. I was finally free. And no matter how many times she tried, I knew I'd never let her drag me back. It had been a couple of months since Nicole's last stunt. I'd thought maybe, finally, she'd taken the hint. My phone had been quiet, no more calls from random family members, no visits, and no unexpected emails from my mom. I was even starting to believe it was over. But with Nicole, nothing was ever that simple. One morning, I was at my apartment sorting through my mail when I found an envelope with an unfamiliar return address. It looked official, stamped, sealed, and ominously thick. When I opened it, my heart sank. It was a letter from a lawyer, Nicole's lawyer. As I read through it, I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and pure frustration. The document was formal, carefully worded, and filled with legal jargon I could barely understand. But the message was clear. Nicole was trying to legally compel me to pay for my half-sister Emily's college expenses. She had gone as far as to attempt a formal request for financial support, trying to make me responsible for covering a significant portion of Emily's tuition and other expenses. I couldn't believe it. Was there no end to this? She'd ignored me for years, taken what she wanted, and only ever reached out when she needed something. And now, when I'd finally stood my ground, she was using the legal system to try and force my hand. I called the lawyer listed on the letter. A receptionist answered, and I explained who I was and why I was calling. She put me on hold, and I could feel my pulse racing as I waited. After a few minutes, the lawyer came on the line. "Hello, Mr. Davis," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I understand this might be upsetting, but my client, Ms. Nicole Roberts, has retained me to represent her in matters concerning family obligations." Family obligations? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Nicole had abandoned all sense of family the moment she decided her new husband and children were more important than me. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I don't understand why this is happening," I said. "I'm not legally obligated to support Emily. She's not even my child." The lawyer paused before responding. "Ms. Roberts has indicated that you've been resistant to assisting with Emily's education and that this reluctance has caused significant financial strain." It was like he was reading from a script, a carefully crafted narrative that Nicole had fed him, one designed to paint me as the heartless son, refusing to help my family. I felt the anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Look," I said, "Nicole hasn't been in my life for years. She drained my own college fund when I needed it most, ignored me, and only contacts me when she wants money. Emily is her responsibility, not mine. I have no obligation to pay for anything." The lawyer, still professional, explained that while Nicole had indeed filed a formal request, there were, thankfully, no actual grounds to enforce it. "I believe this was more of an attempt to reach an amicable solution," he added, in a way that made it sound almost reasonable. But there was nothing reasonable about this. Nicole had gone to the extent of hiring a lawyer, dragging me into a legal mess, all to get her way. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there, numb. I felt a mix of relief and rage, knowing she'd failed in her attempt but angry that she'd even tried. The next day, I met with a lawyer of my own. I wanted to be sure that Nicole couldn't keep pulling these stunts, that there was some way to protect myself from her manipulations. I explained everything to him: the stolen college fund, the years of silence, the recent attempts to guilt trip and intimidate me into paying for Emily. My lawyer listened, nodding thoughtfully as I laid it all out. When I was done, he looked at me with a mix of sympathy and determination. "Legally, there's nothing Nicole can do to force you to pay," he said. "You have every right to refuse. And if she keeps contacting you or involving others, we can consider a restraining order to protect your privacy." It was a relief to hear it from a professional, to know that I wasn't just some pawn in Nicole's game anymore. I thanked him, left his office, and took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But the calm didn't last. Within days, Nicole was back, escalating her campaign. She must have gotten word that her legal attempt had failed because she began reaching out to every mutual contact we had, digging up people I hadn't spoken to in years. She told them her twisted version of the story, making it sound like I was abandoning my family, refusing to help my innocent half-sister. Even Emily reached out again, this time in a much more desperate tone. She was still polite, but I could tell Nicole's manipulation had gotten to her. She was pleading with me, saying things like, "I just want a chance to go to school," and "Mom says you're my only hope." It was painful. Emily was caught in the middle of all this. Someone I barely knew, but who was being used as a tool by Nicole to get what she wanted. I knew Emily wasn't to blame, but I also knew that giving in to Nicole's demands, no matter how they were framed, would only feed her manipulative tactics. So, for the first time, I cut off contact with Emily too. I blocked her number, along with every relative who'd sided with Nicole. It felt harsh, maybe even cruel, but it was the only way I could protect myself. I couldn't keep letting her invade my life, dragging me into her problems. Then, I did the one thing I'd been avoiding all these years. I officially broke all ties with Nicole. I drafted a letter, with the help of my lawyer, making it clear that I wanted no further contact, that I was formally severing our relationship. I made it explicit that if she attempted any more legal action or tried to harass me through family members, I would pursue a restraining order. Sending that letter felt like closing a chapter, a long, painful chapter that had weighed on me for years. It was final, brutal, and yet strangely liberating. For the first time, I felt a deep sense of relief, a freedom I hadn't known in years. I knew there would be fallout, that Nicole would twist the story, spread her lies, paint me as the ungrateful, selfish son. But I didn't care. I was done living for other people's expectations, done letting her control my life. In the months that followed, I started to rebuild. I focused on my career, my friendships, the life I wanted to live. I began to understand what family really meant. Not just the people you're related to, but the people who genuinely care for you, who show up without expecting anything in return. Nicole's absence became a gift, a reminder that I didn't need to sacrifice my own happiness for someone who only saw me as a source of money. And as the months turned into years, I felt more at peace, more sure of myself than ever before.